Definitely glad to have everyone here. Thanks for coming out for it. We are going to get started. So today, some of you I know have seen this presentation already, and those of you that have know that it's a good one. So I wanted to get it in front of the larger community so that John can share some of his experiences with the group. We've got John Moody with us today. John runs email at Klaviyo, part of the KMTA project, which does not stand for KumoMTA. Somehow it stands for Klaviyo instead. But wanted to bring him in. Like I said, I did see this session back in, I think, Toronto, if I remember right. And it's just really some great insights into what it takes to kind of get out of the cloud and get into on-prem. And so, John, appreciate that you could be here. And I will let you switch to presenting, and we'll go from there.
This is actually the third time I've given a version of this presentation. I gave it at MOG in Toronto. I think it was Toronto anyway. And then I gave it again at the Deliverability Summit in Amsterdam last year. Third time's the charm, hopefully. It won't, I think I've whittled down the presentation to the essentials. So hopefully if you saw this before, it will still be worth your while. So this is building self-hosted email infrastructure from the ground up. This is a little bit about me. I've been doing this for a very long time. Been in email for about the last 5 years or so. I currently am the engineering manager of the email platforms team and also the unified channel messaging team at Klaviyo. That last one is new as of like 3 days ago. So I'm expanding my scope, I think is what they call it. My team processes about 12 billion emails a month. That's both through our self-hosted MTA setup, and also we send a lot of, well, no, actually the 12 billion is just through our self-hosted MTA. We're also sending a lot of stuff still through SendGrid. The goal is to eventually taper that down as we continue to build out our system. I also publish a newsletter called This Week in Email. You all should subscribe. So why would you want to bring the MTA in-house besides being a glutton for punishment? There are a couple reasons. Klaviyo did it because we wanted to own our destiny. We wanted to own the infrastructure that was paying the bills, basically. It comes at a great cost savings to not have to pay SendGrid or SparkPost or whoever a fraction of a penny every time you send an email, because when you're sending multiple billions of emails every day, that adds up very quickly. It also gives us the ability to keep closer tabs on things like abuse prevention, alerting when something's going sideways. When you're depending on a third-party ESP, you may not get all of the signals and you may not get them in a timely manner. So when you run an MTA yourself, you have direct access to the pipe, which can be very, very advantageous. So if you decide you want to do this, the first step you have to do is figure out whether or not you want to build or buy. There are many MTA software vendors, including our beloved host. There are lots of reasons that you may want to build your own if you have custom needs. I know some companies that have done that, but there are things to consider during that process. How long is it going to take you to get to market? If you're building an MTA from scratch, you're essentially reinventing the wheel. So your time to market is going to be greater. Team expertise, the expertise needed to run an MTA is not the expertise needed to build an MTA. There's also a long-term maintenance burden. If you write your own, you have to make sure that it's updated. Customization needs, you may have specific needs that an off-the-shelf MTA will not address, and so you need to build your own. I do think that the case for building your own is less and less of a viable option these days. Many of the MTAs on the market offer extreme flexibility. I just don't see the value in that decision. We ended up buying. When you buy, you're still building a lot because you've got to wire it into your processes. You've got to build all of the alerting, all of the infrastructure around that. So there's still a lot of work. So if you decide to buy, then you have to pick an MTA product. There are several factors you need to look at. You need to look at, will it scale? Will it handle the scale that you're going to be throwing at it? Is it going to be reliable under heavy load? Does it give you the access to the deliverability signals that you're going to want? How observable is it? How can you get in there and see what's going on? Or is it largely a black box? How active is the community? How active is the vendor in responding? And then, of course, how much are you going to pay for it? I think I didn't even list that on the slide, but that's a major factor that you need to consider. And there are lots of options on the market, and they're all good. They all have strengths. I would say they all have weaknesses as well. So you really need to do your due diligence and take them out for a spin and check to see what the right path is for you. And then you've got to build a team that's actually going to implement this thing. You've got to find people that know MTAs. You've got to find people that know email, that know about deliverability and spam traps and feedback loops and mail ops and abuse. You've got to have good software engineers who can handle scalable systems, because there are pieces that you're going to need to build around this thing. And it says here remote team management. That may not be an issue for you. It was for us, because our implementation team was spread across the United States. I myself am located in Spokane, Washington. Klaviyo is headquartered in Boston. And when we started this project, none of our team members were in Boston. It was a very critical thing for us to have the ability to pull that team together and to execute effectively. And doing that remotely, managing a team remotely, is not the same skill set as managing an on-premises team. So that may be something that you need to factor in, especially because there aren't a lot of email professionals congregated in some of these places, and there may not be people that are located where you're located. In our case, we didn't have a lot of email professionals in Boston. We had to go looking. And we found one in Northern Virginia. We found one in South Florida. You find professionals where you find professionals, and with the magic of the internet, they don't all have to be in the room together. Also, if you're doing product management, you want to make sure that your product person has experience in the email space. And really, it's just bringing all of these things together. Email is not generic software. You cannot just throw software engineers at the problem and assume that they can figure email out. Email is its own beast. It has quirkiness to it. So if you're going to do this, make sure that you've got somebody running the ship who knows email. And then you move to the initial build out, and this will be multiple stages. You've got to figure out, where are you going to host your MTA? Is it going to be on bare metal? Is it going to be in a co-location center? Is it going to be in the cloud? Are you going to use AWS or Google Cloud Platform or Azure? And then figure out, how are you going to manage the configuration? Because as we know, configuration in an MTA is a rapidly evolving beast. How are you going to get those configurations into your MTA? Every vendor does this a little bit differently. Which one are you going to use? How is that going to work with your workflow? Then you've got to wire your MTAs into your sending pipeline so that you can actually get messages into the MTA and out the other side. Engagement tracking is a big deal. Are you going to use what the MTA provides, or are you going to roll your own? We rolled our own, It was a fairly big undertaking because of the volume we were doing and some specific needs we had. We built an entire engagement tracking system, and then we had to build that out, and then we had to wire it in and test it. And luckily, that's working very well for us. And if you haven't bought a whole bunch of IPs, you're going to need to do that. You don't want to be at the mercy of someone else controlling your IPs. Pony up for a block 20 or a block 24 or whatever, however many you need. You need to get your hands on some IPs. And luckily, the clouds make it pretty easy to do this. Amazon, for example, has their BYOIP system where you can import a whole block of emails and then attach them to their EINs, and it makes it pretty easy. And then once you've got your IPs, you need to define what your IP strategy is going to be. You've got to figure out, are you going to have, is it going to be exclusively dedicated IPs, where an IP is assigned to a customer? How many IPs are you going to give each customer? And if you're not going to do that, then you're looking at some kind of pooling strategy for shared pools. And then you have to figure out, okay, do we have a high reputation pool and a low reputation pool? How many pools do you need? How many gradations of reputational quality do you need there? You need to think that through in advance and have a plan. You need to figure out how you're going to monitor and observe the functioning of your MTA. Does this mean that, you're going to be reading Prometheus metrics or Stats D metrics, or, what does that look like? How does that convert to dashboards that your team can monitor? And who's going to be doing that monitoring? Do they have the skills? That's important. Do they know what to look for? Do they know what a bad deliverability signal looks like? Delivery event processing is important. Your feedback loops, you're going to need an inbound cluster. Maybe it's a single box. It doesn't necessarily have to be a cluster, but in most cases, it probably would be. How are you going to manage and rotate DKIM keys? You're going to need to define your mail ops processes to know what to do when something goes south, because it will go south, and it'll go south at the worst possible time. Murphy's extended law, if it's possible for any number of events to go wrong, they will do so in the worst possible sequence. So you want to have processes and run books defined so that your team, when the excrement hits the fan, your team isn't wondering what to do. They've already game planned it out. So a lot of this is just thinking ahead and planning ahead. And again, this is why it's so essential to have when you've built that initial team, having email experience in the room, because they will know how to do these things. So now that we've built out our system, we turn all of our traffic onto it and blast away, right? No. Not if you want those emails delivered. We have to warm those IPs. The industry is moving toward domain-based reputation, but we're not there yet. And I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon. IP reputation is still going to be a massive thing. And as long as it is, we're going to have to warm up those IPs. So what we did is we wrote a traffic splitter into our sending pipeline where we could dial up by various percentages the email that we were sending through our new MTA system versus the stuff we were sending to a third-party ESP. We were able to dial that up over the course of about 3 months to get those IPs warmed with good reputation. When you are planning your rollout, you need to plan time for IP warming. And you need to plan a lot of time for IP warming because there will be setbacks. Or I remember when we were doing our warming, all of a sudden for no reason, Comcast started deferring a lot of our mail, and we weren't sure why. So we had to reach out and talk to them and figure out what's going on and allay their fears. So for us at Klaviyo, our Super Bowl, if you will, the biggest event of the year is BFCM, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. For those of you who aren't familiar with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, that is the time when every retailer on the planet wants to reach out to their customers and offer them special deals. We see a large spike in traffic over this period. And so we spend a lot of the year getting ready for Black Friday. And that means that we load test everything, not just once, we do it repeatedly. And don't just test your MTA stuff, test the entire sending pipeline as much as you can, end to end, multiple times, because a lot of times it won't be your system that fails, it'll be an upstream system that fails under load. When we're rolling out, be happy. And then we realized that our internal message queuing system wasn't able to handle that load. We were stressing it out more than they were prepared for. So we had to do some scrambling before BFCM to get that fixed. And thirdly, you just plan for the unexpected. When you're dealing with that much volume coming in at once, stuff will happen. You need to know what your failure modes are. You need to have your run books ready, and you need to rehearse your incident response before it matters. So we survived BFCM. Everything was good, hunky-dory. And so we went about doing all of the things that we didn't have time to do before BFCM, adding in dedicated IP support, shoring up and expanding our click tracking mechanisms, building an automated IP warming so it wasn't a manual process anymore, working on our processing, working on getting increased visibility and procedures for handling abuse. You know, somebody gets an account takeover, you've got to know how to deal with that and how to deal with it quickly so that it doesn't tank the deliverability of your whole system. And then getting business visibility, you know, so that the people in the C-suite can see how this MTA that they just spent a whole bunch of money on is performing, and critically, how much money it's saving them. And I mean that part literally, by the way. We built out a dashboard for KMTA that took our CPM for SendGrid and our CPM for KMTA, which we had calculated, you know, based on our infrastructure costs and everything. And then, you know, if we sent, you know, 1 million messages that day, it would calculate, this is how much money we saved today.
I had a customer back in a past life that was one of those flash sale companies where noon, all of a sudden everybody gets an email with whatever's on sale that day. We were in the middle of a meeting and they're like, wait, we have to stop for a second. And they flipped the projector over to this live graph that you saw go injections, sends, opens, clicks, and you saw each of these lines spike, and then revenue. And the entire email team's justification was right there on the revenue line. They never got questioned on any budget because they just showed a graph of money coming in as mailings were going out.
The comment makes a good point. BFCM is kind of expanded its scope. We see ramp ups the entire week leading up to Black Friday. We'll see traffic spike. I mean, Black Friday is still the biggest day, and Cyber Monday is a close second, but we see increases in traffic all throughout November. This is why we start testing in August. So, key takeaways. It is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Your mileage may vary. Assess your team, assess your scale, assess your business needs. But if you choose to go this route, you can save a good bit of money over the ESPs that are out there. Secondly, if you choose to buy, you're going to be building a lot. You're going to need software excellence at scale. So hire accordingly and hire email experts as well. We hired a combination of, our initial team was comprised of 2 email experts, 2 really, really good software engineers that we hired away from Amazon, an engineering manager who was learning quickly because he didn't know what the heck he was doing. That was me. I have since learned what I was doing. Thirdly, go in with a plan. I cannot stress this enough. If you look on the Klaviyo technical blog, there is a blog article I wrote. Gosh, I guess it's been about 2 years ago now, that talked about how we planned out the KMTA project, because it was a multi-year effort to build this thing out. And we had to have a plan to make sure that we did things in the right sequence. And remember that it's more than just an engineering operation. This kind of project will transform your organization, not just your delivery stack or your tech stack. You need to know as an engineering leader what you are getting yourself into, but the company also needs to do that because it's going to be a long runway before they see the kind of savings that they're going to want to see. And you can't just throw all of your traffic on it at once. There's, there are reasons to slow roll this. You need to prepare to message that to senior leadership. Yes, this is going to be a slow process. Here's why. And here's the benefit that you'll see at the far side. I mentioned this before, but this is the newsletter that I send out every Wednesday morning. This week in email, it's totally free. I do recommend that everyone subscribe. And here is my contact information. Also, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on there and fairly active. And that's it. I'll leave this up for just a moment so everyone can write that email down if they need to. And I think we're ready for questions, Mike.
All right. So if anybody has any, feel free to put them into the chat. I've got a few to start off. So when you were doing your warm up and transitioning over to your own IPs, did you have a common DKIM signature between the two environments? Was Klaviyo signing a Klaviyo signature to a common domain, whether it was SendGrid or your internal MTAs?
That is a good question. I'm trying to remember how we handled that. I think we actually used the first of all, we used a different subdomain on the sendings. We weren't cross-pollinating, and we had DKIM keys set up for that.
Okay. So there was at least a common top level to both sends when you were signing.
Yes.
Cool. The next thing I was going to ask is, what were the biggest surprises? What were the gotchas that you hadn't expected that you ran into?
Honestly, the biggest thing I wasn't expecting was the messaging aspect of this. And I don't mean the technical messaging. I mean the messaging to senior leadership. When we started this, we had an initial amount of traffic on the system. They had moved on. The next shiny object had captured their attention. It was probably AI. It's usually AI, but so it reminded me that those are very, very busy people, and if I were starting this over from scratch, I would have made it a priority to constantly have this in front of their face and remind them of the benefits and the cost savings and why they invested all this money so that they don't lose sight of the end goal.
Actually, that was you led into my other one, which would be if you were to start it all over, what would you have done differently or done sooner? Are there things you would have kicked off earlier in the process or adjusted?
That's the big one. I think I would have. So the problem we had was that we had a lot of customers that were on dedicated infrastructure with SendGrid. They were on dedicated APs that SendGrid owned, or dedicated sending domains, dedicated click tracking domains. And getting people to change their DNS is kind of difficult. So what we're doing right now is we're building out tools to make that transition easier for customers. Having a dedicated switch over with that will automatically warm up their new IPs as they transition, things that will help them manage their DNS, those changes using a service called Entry, which is just amazing for this kind of stuff. But just building out that glide path to help people to move over. I wish we had done that work a year ago.
For somebody that's going to, like you were talking earlier about a message router, and of course you had to build your own click and open tracking. And there is definitely a trend that I've seen when talking to people who are using a cloud provider, is that the more of their tools you use, the easier it is to get started, but the harder it is to change in the future. If somebody were saying, hey, we're not doing this yet, but we're looking to do it in the future, what kind of things would you tell them to work on now so that it would be easier later to make these kind of changes?
Using a modular infrastructure. will help you a lot, because you're going to need to wire in an MTA eventually, whether you're using a third-party ESP now or not. You're going to need to break certain things off of the process. Maybe you need to plug in your own engagement tracking system. Maybe you need to plug in your own IP warming system. Whatever that is, you've got to build your system in a very modular way so that when the time comes, you don't have to go play around with the plumbing a whole lot. It's just, repoint it. The other thing is make sure that your message queuing is rock solid. We made the choice early on, or were shoehorned into the choice early on, to use an internal message queuing system that had been built in-house. And if I were doing it again, I wouldn't have done that. I would have gone with an off-the-shelf SQSQ or something like that. It caused us more headaches than it solved. That would be my thing, is use best engineering practices. Don't reinvent the wheel unless you need to. There was no need to recreate message queuing. Mm-hmm. That's a solved problem. So that's I guess that would be my my caution there.
Okay. And I think when I've seen this, like like you said, engagement management, like some of the keys, I think the more you're able to use a cloud provider as an MTA in the cloud, rather than taking the extra bits that are kind of produced for your convenience, always makes the transition easier. And even when we've seen organizations that maybe don't go on-prem, they often will try to get business continuity and whatnot through spreading their messaging out across multiple SaaS providers. And even that is better enabled the less you're hooked into each organization or each provider's individual tools. Because like template management, click and open tracking, the reporting and all that, those things become much easier transitioning becomes much easier if people have already implemented those themselves or found a solution that's outside of one particular vendor as far as that goes.
Yeah, and there are middle ground solutions now that really weren't available when we were doing this 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. You don't have to say, well, I'm either going to go all in on my own MTA system, or I'm going to have to go with a SendGrid or a SparkPost or whoever. You could look at a middle ground, like the UnMTA that just launched. They're basically doing Kumo in the cloud managed for you. Mm-hmm. That's a good middle ground solution and could be a stepping stone toward MTA independence.
And I'm going to shamelessly self-promote and say that we also do remote management. So if somebody wants to own their MTAs but not run their MTAs, we're here for you. Brought to you by Kumo Corp. Anyway, are there any questions? We haven't seen any show up in the chat. There's one. You send billions of emails. Could you give a short overview of the infrastructure used during Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then off peak?
It's essentially the same infrastructure, just more of it. Our sending pipeline is largely based in Kubernetes, so it's just a matter of spinning up more pods. Now, our MTAs are not running in Kubernetes yet. We have a fleet of 24 fairly beefy servers that are behind a load balancer, and then our worker pods that are processing the email that comes to us. They and there can be any number of those. They're connecting SMTP through the load balancer to the MTAs and injecting that email. And then the mail goes out through a series of proxies that are wired up to EINs in AWS.
With your scale, what do you target, like a per node volume per hour, like burst rate for as you bring up and down nodes? What's your unit of scale as far as what you're targeting for throughput?
We took the MTAs that we were running, sized the beefy EC2 instances, and because MTAs are kind of finicky, and you don't want to just spin them up and shut them down without draining the queues and all that fun stuff, we just leave those up. One of the things that we've done somewhat is we will turn some of those off, during non-peak periods. But for BFCM, we have them all running, of course, and then things are just load balanced to those and sending those out. So what we did was we stress tested one of those instances to see how many emails per minute we could reliably push. Based on that, we determined what our scale needed to be with some margin.
Okay. Follow-up. So the whole integration stack is running Kubernetes, but the MTAs themselves are not. Did you decouple the MTAs from their egress IPs using Kumo proxy? Just to clarify, they are not using KumoMTA, so they would not be using Kumo proxy. But otherwise, feel free to answer.
Yeah. Kumo unfortunately had the misfortune of coming to market about 3 months after we had already made our MTA decision and pushed forward. Mike and the guys are great. And if I were starting this over again, I would seriously consider using them because, I mean, their feature set is amazing. Checks all of our buttons. And plus Mike paid me $20 to say that. But
Well, I'm going to. I didn't yet. I had to wait for you to do it.
Oh, fair enough. Well, I'll send you my Venmo later.
So the idea is how did you decouple the IPs from the boxes with a proxy of some kind, and what was your strategy there? I think is
yes. So what we do is we have a layer of MTAs and we have a layer of proxy servers that the MTAs connect to, and the proxy servers are what are connected to the EINs. We started out using HA proxy for this. We are now using a proxy that is built specifically for the MTA that we're using.
There's one there that's not entirely related to the topic at hand that I'll answer towards the end. If there's anybody else that has any questions, we can definitely get into those. So while we wait for one more to come in, I will answer this. Somebody was saying, hey, off topic, what's the flow of a message that's injected over the APIs versus SMTP? So this one is a Kumo specific question. The answer there is that there is an event that fires. There's 2 events related to injecting over API. First one is HTTP server valid auth basic, which is essentially your opportunity to decide how to treat any authentication requests that you have coming in. And then the second one is HTTP message generated, which is giving you essentially the message that was assembled by the system based on how it was injected. And from there, you can do all the decisions that you'd be looking to do based on how those messages came in. It's because an HTTP API request is non-interactive like SMTP is, you don't get hooks at every attribute of the message because the flow isn't happening one communication at a time. Just to answer that one. And I think that's it. So I really appreciate your time, John, and sharing this with everyone. And I think it provides some great insights for those that are looking to get their heads out of the clouds, essentially.
All right. Well, happy to do it, guys.
Appreciate it so much. And this will be available online afterwards in the YouTube channel. I'd say, how to reach us at KumoMTA, but you somehow got into this channel. So I think you already know that. Appreciate your time. If anybody's watching this after though, you can reach us at hello@kumomta.com, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you, everyone.